People coming. Please have a seat. Wait for everyone to settle in. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Stefan Schmitt. I'm presenting today Self-Host Process in Windows 10 Engineering. You see my email address. So if you have any questions afterwards that we don't respond to, please feel free to send me email. I'm always ready to answer those questions. I'm in Sustain Engineering, a software test engineer. My component areas are terminal services, application compatibility, and PC health. I'm also responsible for driving the self-host process in Windows Sustain Engineering. And here's the agenda for today. We will first talk about definition, which involves also the mission statement, what is it all about, the philosophy behind self-host. After that, I will briefly give you the opportunity to ask questions about this, and then afterwards we walk through the SP self-host process, GDR self-host process, and the vendor-specific self-host. And then at the end we're going to have, of course, a question session, Q&A session again. If you have questions in between that you really want to ask right away, feel free to ask those, but otherwise it might be better if we ask them in the two question and answer sessions we have in the middle and at the end. Makes it easier to follow the whole thing. All right, let's start out with the definition. Self-host. Let me read this quickly to you. Self-host is the group-wide deployment of pre-release builds on mail machines to identify customer scenario issues and ensure reliability. Well, that's pretty long. So first of all, let me give you the definition of three of those terms in here. Mail machine. What is a mail machine? Seems pretty simple. We call it a mail machine because you read your mail on it. Mail machine distinguishes itself from a test machine, a debugger, and a stress machine. Usually you have test machines. To perform your tests, you rebuild those on a daily basis, maybe multiple times. You try to have clean environments on a mail machine, on a test machine, excuse me. Stress machines, they run stress. You don't run any office suites, you don't run any line of business applications on your stress machine. A mail machine is a machine that you configure to your own convenience. It has a very generic environment for yourself. You set it up, you have your own wallpaper, you store your own personal data on that, your bugs. You will build code on that machine. Sometimes it's referred to as dev box or dev machine. It's basically the machine that you will never ever rebuild unless you have a major problem. And this is the machine you self-host on. Second term that has to be defined is pre-release build. We have several different deliverables. We have hotfixes and service packs. And hotfixes can also be a GDR or a redist. You might have heard those terms before. I hope that you have heard those before. We care mostly about GDRs and service packs. Those are the two deliverables we self-host on. And pre-release means basically they have not been released yet. Service pack, it's pre-beta, beta build, an RC build, or pre-RTM builds. And for GDRs, before it goes out. It might be refreshed in between, but before we release it on Windows Update or through automatic update, we will self-host it. The third term is customer scenario. We're looking for customer scenario issues when we self-host. Customer scenarios, well, as I said, it's not a test machine. We don't have a clean environment. We don't specifically look at one particular component. We look at something that customers might experience. Customers might experience something when they interact with an application, when they interact with the system directly. It's most of the time visual things. If you all of a sudden cannot bring up your wallpaper, for instance, you don't see your theme, something is broken, some dialogue doesn't appear in the way you expect it to appear. These kind of things are typical customer scenarios. Also, the interaction between applications and the different configurations. In the test pass, you have preset configuration. On your mail machine, it's a completely unknown configuration to other people. It's always different. It's all to the way you want to have it set up. There might be rules of what kind of office suite you should use, what kind of line of business applications you should install. But within those applications, you still have the choice how you configure those, how you set those up. And you might add on other applications. You might prefer a different player than Windows Media Player. Maybe you want to have Real Networks Player or both at the same time installed. Not everybody has it installed in that configuration. So these are customer scenarios that we don't really test. They will be covered in self-hosting. Second, very important is always to understand self-hosting is an essential part of the quality assurance of the WinSE deliverables. People underestimate the power of self-host because it's very difficult to measure it. Self-hosting is not so much about finding the bugs. If we find them, that's great. We want to find them. But if we don't find bugs, this gives us the confidence that there are no bugs in there. We basically, and that's an internal term that we use there, is eat our own dog food. It's also referred as dog fooding, self-hosting. It's basically putting ourselves into the position of the customer. If you have an unpleasant experience, if you feel that it takes way too long to bring up an application, if you have a performance issue in this case, this is something that customers will see too. You put yourself into this situation. In a test pass, you're totally separate. It's a very sterile environment, and you don't have this kind of experience because you just execute what you want to do. On your mail machine, you are not testing. You want to work. You want to perform some daily work. You want to edit a document, and Office bails on you. It doesn't work the way you want it to work. So it impacts your productivity, although you're not testing it. So this is basically yourself putting yourself in the shoes of customer. And that rolls up into the mission statement for the self-host process. Ensure a high level of quality of WinSE deliverables, as there are GDRs and service packs, by getting wide coverage of knowledge worker scenarios. Here's the word knowledge worker used. The term knowledge worker as opposed to customers. Customers is a wide range, from the very basic user, which only surfs the internet maybe, up to the IT knowledge worker. You yourself should consider yourself as a knowledge worker because you know how the operating system behaves. You are able to troubleshoot problems, and you use the operating system in a very wide variety of components versus not so technical people which might only use a very small subset. Knowledge workers are the most critical customers we have because they use the entire operating system in its always breadth and its length and depth. So you heard about stress before, I hope. Stress and self-host are always mistaken, sometimes one for the other. Many people approach me and say, well, why are you complaining I'm not self-hosting? I'm just kicked off the automation last night and it ran all night. Stress is not self-host. In fact, the only thing that we have in common is that we expect everybody to do it. And it's something that you do next to your testing duties. It's not directly connected to it, but it's a team-wide approach. Other than that, stress and self-host are very, very different from each other. So I listed a couple of things that I want to go through with you so you understand how they are different and why they are different. First of all, I mentioned this already, test machine versus mail machine. For stress, you're not using your mail machine. I mean, you install all your applications, you spend many hours to configure it the way you want it. You run stress on it. Stress very likely will run into a problem and maybe totally breaking your machine. You might have to rebuild it. You wouldn't want to do this on your mail machine. You use a test machine, a machine that you don't really rely on. Also, if the machine breaks in, if you have a stress break, you have to hold it, maybe for several days until the problem has been identified, triaged, and maybe fixed. You cannot give up your mail machine for this long of a time. At the same time, if you have a self-host break, if you run into a big problem on your self-host machine, which is your mail machine, then you might have to hold this too for a fairly lengthy amount of time. But in this case, it's certainly worth it, because we have found a customer scenario that all the customers will see out there. Most of the customers in some cases. But you as a customer hit the scenario, it's very likely that many customers, hundreds of thousands of people will hit this problem. So we have to fix it. So this contribution is well worth it. Versus on the stress environment, which is second thing, a clean environment, you know already what the configuration is of this machine. You don't install any additional applications. You don't install anything beyond what the operating system is made of. So you know already what's there, what the configuration is. You have a sort of dirty environment, contaminated with many applications that interact. You install, they uninstall. There might be lots of packages left when you happen to install an application or a small freeware application that you install to test something out on your machine. So you like some little gizmo you have from the internet. You happen to uninstall it, it leaves something behind, some registry keys, some files. So it is a sort of a dirty environment you have on your mail machine. On the stress machine, you do want to have a clean environment, because you have expected behavior. You don't have expected behavior on the self-host machine, on the mail machine. Stress is automated. There's a myriad of tests that once you kick them off, they run concurrently. Self-host is completely interactive. You are needed. The human factor is crucial to self-host, because whatever you do, whatever you perform on your machine will cause a reaction, and that reaction you have to evaluate. As I mentioned before, if you bring up Office, you want to edit a document, and a dialog pops up. You didn't expect this dialog to pop up, or you don't know what to do with this dialog. This dialog never popped up before. You know the behavior of that machine. That's the interactivity that's required from self-host. Fourth thing, resource problems. This is what you're looking for mainly in stress. You create artificially bottlenecks, you reduce the memory you have available, you run many applications, stress applications and scripts at the same time, so you basically expose it to possible memory leaks and resource problems. This is one of the things we might look for a self-host tool. If you expose this, as I mentioned before, a performance issue, you try to open up an application, it takes much longer than you're used to. That's a performance problem, also a resource problem. But it's not the main target we have for self-host. Self-host targets pretty much any issue that impacts you in your productivity, and mostly app compat problems. Application compatibility is something very hard to test, because you never know, is it the application that has the problem, is it the operating system that causes the problem? We care about the operating system causing the problem in interaction with the application. And there's so many out there. And each application has thousands and thousands of ways you can use it. The functionality of the application is something that has to be understood and tested. So application compatibility can never completely covered in all the scenarios that are out there. So those are the areas where we mostly look at. But it can be anything else. As I mentioned before, also is visual things. You have your favorite picture as a wallpaper in the background. You have a theme set up, maybe configured in the way you want to. You install a GR that you acquire to self-host, or the latest build of the service pack. All of a sudden it's broken. Something that only happens to you because only you have this particular theme tested. Might be a generic theme or generic wallpaper, so it's not being included in the test pass. You might have found a test hole in a test pass of this component even. So this is being exposed. Fifth point, when do you run stress, when do you run self-host? Well, stress, you can run it during the day. If you have a dedicated stress machine, you run it 24/7 even, if you want to. But it's mostly enforced overnight. Use a test machine that, because you're not here, you can just kick off stress at night, use this resource at night for running stress on it. Self-host only happens during the day, unless you're a night person who work at night. But basically, this goes back to point 3, interactivity. Self-host only happens if you do something with the machine, if you're there, physically doing something. If you're at home at night and rest in a TS session, same thing. But most of the time, self-host itself happens during the day, when you're at the machine, when you're doing something with the machine interactively. So entirely different to stress again. And the last point, and that's the most critical sometimes for people, is the impact. Stress, you set it up, you kick it off, you leave. You come back in the morning, there's a break or not. Self-host is on your mail machine. You have to install the deliverable, which is either GDR or a service pack. Most of the time you have to reboot your machine. Rebooting is always painful. Some people are very efficient, they only have one application open that they currently work on and close everything down. Reality is most people have at least 30 windows open, as much as the memory can handle. And then they leave one application open, work on the other. They open another email, and another spreadsheet, another browser. You have to close all those down and reboot. Very painful. So that's a big impact. Also, the impact is even bigger if you hit actually a break, if you find a problem, which is hopefully a problem in the operating system that we exposed right there versus just a configuration problem that's nothing that really we can fix. If you hit a problem, you have to hold the machine. Very huge impact. You have to find ways to work around that. Take a test machine, temporarily set this up to do the general work you do. Like looking at bugs, you have to set up Product Studio, Office, to read email and work on documents. Very high impact. That's one of the biggest problems we have in self-host. To get participation, you have to make people understand that it's worth it. Okay. As I mentioned before, that bugs is something we certainly want to expose, but it's not the main thing we look for in self-host. Self-host is finding the bugs that block us, but also getting a wide participation to get confidence in our own product. But still, showing some numbers, some results that we actually find bugs during self-host always helps. So you can see here in SP3 we found 17 bugs that we fixed. There was about 60 issues that were filed against self-host. Some are by design, that people perceived as a problem. Some of them are actually application issues that, actually perceived as a problem with the operating system, but they were not. So we fixed 17. In SP4 we fixed 21. Just to understand how much more bugs we found in SP4, the time we had for SP3 was about 14 months. For SP4 we spent only 10 months. And we found still 4 more issues. Percentage-wise, that's about 25% more. So self-host works when it starts to work better. You find issues actually. So it is efficient if you want to put a number on it. Yes, one thing I wanted to mention too is compared to stress again. Stress in the presentation was mentioned. They found 60 bugs. They found I think 150 issues were filed, but only 60 bugs were fixed in SP3. Here we have 17. Now you have to understand stress coverage is granted by the runtime and the numbers of machines they run. There's several hundred or even up to 1,000 machines that we can run on stress, and it heavily pounds on the system. Your impact is much less because only what you do as a single person, you run only one application at a time that you actively work on, versus hundreds of applications running concurrently. So we don't artificially look for those bugs. Yet it's only about 3.5 times more bugs that they fixed in SP3 than we fixed here. To put it a little bit in perspective and make self-host look a little bit better too. So before we move on, I told you after discussing self-host, I want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. I have one more thing I want to mention. I have no slide for that. Talking about bugs that we find during self-host, because that's most of the time the problem that we have with self-host. People think they have to do something. There's instructions to it, like a test pass. Give me instructions. How do I self-host? You don't really have to do anything special. Self-hosting is basically setting up the environment. And don't let yourself be influenced. Just keep your eyes open overall. You install the service pack and then do what it is you do during the day with your machine. If you see something suspicious, if you hit a problem, it may be related to the fact that the environment you have set up, the service pack you have installed, or the other deliverables like GDRs you have installed that made your system different to what it was before, causing the problem. But there's no specific instructions. And we try to refrain from giving too specific instructions because it makes people believe that once I start Word and try to edit a document or open a bug and edit a bug and do these steps, perform those suggested things you should do, that's it. I'm good. Self-host is done. Not really. You do so many more things that we don't know that you do. We don't want to give you instructions. Don't let you be influenced by any instructions. Just set it up and remember it is there. You have the service pack installed. If you hit a problem, it might be the service pack. And then you have to report the problem. We have to follow up. That is all it is to self-host really. So it is not really something well scripted. I have 3 bugs as an example that were found during SP4 and actually fixed. I want to mention that as an example of what kind of issues are found and fixed in the past. The first one is I cannot install the service pack if the boot drive has less than 20 megabytes. Think about that. If you have a test machine, especially nowadays, test machines have 40 gigabyte at least on the hard drive. And you might have only 2 or 3 partitions on it. On your main machine, you dump a lot of data on. So you run quickly out of disk space. So this is a scenario that's very likely to happen on your main machine. On a test machine, you rebuild this machine constantly and only install what you really need. So you won't run into this resource problem. Also, stress doesn't necessarily create this kind of a bottleneck on your hard drive because you want to continue running beyond that. If it creates a bottleneck on the hard drive that is that severe, with down to 20 megabytes, then most of the applications will be blocked to run. So stress wouldn't expose it either. Also, this happens during install. Stress doesn't really test installing. It happens after you have installed it. So this is, for instance, one good example for a self-host problem. It is only being exposed in your machine. The setup team won't catch that unless they have this kind of test pass of limiting the space that's available on your hard drive. Another problem that we found, SP4 install through a TS session fails to mismatch binaries. Let's leave the mismatch binaries aside. Installing through a TS session. Most of the time if you install, you either do it using automation or some other unattended installation method, or you physically at the machine. You usually don't TS into a machine. TS is terminal services session, opening a terminal services session, a remote session, and installing it. What happens is many people, when they go at home, they RAS into CorpNet and open a TS session to their mail machine. And since they're not working on it, they close their sessions remotely, their applications remotely, and all the remote sessions they have open on their machine, and then install it through a TS session from home. So they can reboot it in the morning when they come in. It's all set for them. They didn't waste too much time during the day installing it. Didn't have to wait on it. So this is something that is very likely to happen during self-hosting. Not necessarily during your test pass, unless it is part of your test pass. The TS team did not catch this. The last one is errors in the event viewer regarding WMI drivers. Who looks in the event viewer? It should be part of your test pass, quite honestly. If you run tests, at the end look at the event viewer if something happens. If there are some things banged out, you have some stop signs in there. Not everybody does that. This was also something, a problem with WMI. It was only exposed doing self-hosting on your mail machines. And people look at the event viewer because they care about the mail machine. It should be up and running. If there's a problem, make sure that no one is accessing it, do a security audit on a regular basis, and make sure there's no problems with the drivers. Someone looked in his event log and saw this exposed. They reported it. So again, something that is only impacting self-host machines. Now, before we move on to those walkthroughs about the process, does anyone have a question about, we talked about self-host, the definition, how to self-host, what to do in order to self-host? Please.
Actually, Basically, I need to understand how exactly we ensure high level of quality. How do we measure it? Whether we have done the...
The question was, how do we ensure a high level of quality? Well, again, that's something you want to have basically put a number to it. High level of quality. We measure it mainly by participation. The wider the participation, the better. If we have 100 people self-hosting and no one finds a problem, that means 100 customers work for a certain amount of time without hitting a problem. If you have 1,000, it gives us even more confidence. That's the only way we really can measure it, because there's no specific test pass where you can say this test has passed, this test has passed, and this test has passed. First thing I will talk about right now in SP Self-Host walkthrough is what we do before we actually ask people to self-host. That's basically some pre-measuring of the quality. But measuring the quality itself to self-host is only possible by measuring the participation. And how we measure the participation, that's mentioned here too in the walkthrough. Does this answer your question, roughly? It's a difficult question to answer.
Is this self-host is another name of ad hoc testing, or it's different from ad hoc testing?
Okay. Is the self-host, what is the self-host compared to ad hoc testing, right? Well, self-host testing and ad hoc testing, it is very similar. Ad hoc testing is something that you find aside from the test pass. It might be something that you find actually while you perform your test pass, but it's not really pertinent to your test pass. For instance, you try to install, prepare for your test pass, and you find a problem with setup. That's also an ad hoc bug. Self-host bugs can be ad hoc bugs. And let me make a distinction also before we move on between self-host bugs and self-host blocking bugs. Maybe that makes it a bit clearer. Self-host bugs are bugs that are being found during self-host. Obviously. But then there are also self-host blocking bugs. Self-host blocking bugs can be ad hoc bugs. It can be bugs that are found during a regular test pass, as they're supposed to be found. But they are blocking you from doing your day-to-day work. For instance, if application compatibility tests Office and Outlook doesn't start, that's certainly going to block you. This build, we would not recommend you to install this GDR or the service pack because you cannot read your email. This is blocking you from self-hosting. And self-host bugs might not impact you that severely. We would still say, well, you can go continue self-hosting, but you know what, your theme might be a little bit screwed up in the background. You don't see the picture you put in your screen properly because you have a problem with some of the pixels there. Not a major impact, but it was still found during self-host. This is something we might address. Not necessarily, but that's found during self-host. Ad hoc bugs, as I said, something that we find outside of our daily work. And ad hoc bug can be a self-host bug, but it's basically a wider group. Does this basically answer the question? Okay, good. Please.
Can you show us any of the self-host bugs you found in SP4 or SP3?
I mentioned 3 of them. I could pull them up. Right now, I don't want to go into showing them because I have to pull up Product Studio. It takes a while. I can send out a query to all of you guys if you're interested in it. If you access Product Studio and look at the how found field, how found equals self-host. Those are basically self-host bugs. Some people mark them also as ad hoc bugs. That's a big problem we have sometimes to identify them. So, which plays again in the area of self-host blocking bugs. So we look at the bugs that are found, which are marked as self-host, found as self-host, and we also look at every other bug that's being found and check if any of those bugs that are regularly found blocking self-host. And those 2 groups together make up the bugs we're really concerned about when we look at self-host. But in general, if you look at the how found fields equals self-host, that brings up all the bugs that are found specifically during self-host. Or did you want to have more examples? Or was this the actual question? Do you want more examples for self-host bugs?
No, I'll check it out in Product Studio.
You want to have the whole list, right? Do the whole list to get it in Product Studio. Any further questions, please?
Most of the people will have Windows XP as their OS. Okay, so you tend to test only XP service packs. Suppose if you're also working on Win2K, so how are those addressed in this Salesforce process?
That's a pretty good question. It's a very big concern of ours. The question is, most people have Windows XP installed in their system, since we're testing Windows XP service packs at the moment. What happens with Windows 2000? And that, to go further with the questions, that's specifically a concern with GDRs. Because GDRs apply to NT4, NT4TS, Windows 2000, Windows 2003, and XP across all platforms, and we should have coverage across all platforms. Now, since we're phasing out NT4, and it's very hard to ask, most of the line of business applications don't run on Windows and NT4, we don't ask people specifically to self-host. But we try to isolate a group of people that specifically self-hosts on Windows 2000. And it's more complicated than that even, because we have to have several different service pack levels. We maintain still service pack 2, all the way up to service pack 4 on Windows 2000, but that's 3 platforms already right there we have to take care of in GDR self-host alone. And then for XP we have RTM, SP1, and Windows 2003 it's RTM. It's 6 different platforms we need coverage on. And it's mainly singling out people and asking them to self-host on Windows 2000 or on a specific service pack level. You have to be proactive in doing that. Because if you ask people just self-host on whatever you have, sure enough you only have XP, SP1, even more, because RTM, you have to install all those critical updates on top of it. That creates a lot of hassle. So you will have the latest version of the operating system most likely. You do have to be proactive and single out people, and that's what we try to do. Any other questions?
Do you have a time period of how long you need to self-host, or till the next GDR is released?
That's actually something which is very current. We try to figure this out right now. We're revamping the whole GDR self-host. I get into this a little bit deeper later on. But just to answer your question directly, is we try to self-host as soon as the package has been built and preliminary in-depth testing has been performed by the component owner. Once this has been done, we try to kick off self-host for GDRs. And that should be well before the broad test pass, if possible. And then all the way to the end to the broad test pass. But I will explain this later on when we talk about the GDR walkthrough. I will bring this topic up again, and then the question will be answered in more detail. Please?
Once you convert a particular bug using a self-host kind of a testing principle, and you fix that bug, does that particular test case go into some kind of automated test case for the further etc.?
The question is, if you find a bug during self-host and the bug is actually fixed, does the test case, a specific test case for this bug fix, go into test pass? Actually, the answer is, of course, yes. We don't have a procedure where we follow up from the self-host side, but the test owner should follow up on that. Because when we find a self-host bug, it's going to be in some area, in some component. If you find an application compatibility will be the owner. If you find a problem in GDI will be the owner. And those guys are responsible, first of all, for fixing it. And once it's fixed, and it's obviously a test hole, then they are responsible for filling that test hole. So it's going in their test pass. It's their responsibility. And they do this when they do the bug analysis. And you had a presentation on bug analysis before, I think. So that covers it. Any further questions before I move on? If you have any questions overall and that you come to your mind, at the end there will be ample time also to ask questions. And some of those questions that were asked are probably become more clearer, and the answers will be better explained once we go through the process of actually self-hosting. First thing is SP self-host, self-hosting a service pack. What we originally did before we actually started GDR self-hosting also. First of all, when the service pack comes out, we get a service pack out about twice a week, unless there's any build breaks. We try to be on a cycle having twice a week a service pack. That's about every 3 days. So it gives us a bit time before the next build comes out. We don't have to install it right away to get coverage and move on to the next build. So what we do is do some preliminary testing on the service pack to make sure that it, for instance, installs. Very basic, but some things might not be caught right away. So we try to install, if you go back to Windows 2000, if we test Service Pack 5, we make sure it installs an SP3, SP4, and SP5. SP3 and SP4 and SP2. And SP5, granted we already self-hosting, we ask people to uninstall it first, the previous build. So we test the uninstall scenario of the previous build. Might be broken too, because technically you are still self-hosting that build. People have not tested the uninstall scenario. We try to catch that too. Then basic operation system functionality, which is, do you have internet connectivity? Can you reach the intranet? Are you able to reach network shares of any type? Restricted shares, hidden shares. If you have internet connectivity, can you reach SSL pages, secure pages? Can you need intranet secure pages? I think that's basically the main things we try to test around that area. It's very basic but very crucial because I already relies on it. Line of business applications, everybody uses Office. Make sure you can send an email, make sure you can actually bring up all the applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. All of them start properly, and you can perform basic file functions like saving files, opening files, things like that. And of course, Product Studio is another line of business application. Can you edit a bug? Can you bring it up? Can you start a query? We have a few other line of business applications that we do some testing on, but those are the most crucial ones. Visual Studio would be another important thing. We also try to add some SD functionality that you make sure that you can actually see source code. You can sync with the source depot servers and things like that. But that we don't do in a separate machine. I, for instance, do this on my own mail machine. Once I've done those tests, I'm confident enough to install it on my mail machine, and then I basically test my enlistment, because it's kind of difficult to look at enlistments without having your own users, and it's hard to automate that. But those are the basic tests we try to perform. Once those pass, we send out email and ask people to self-host. We send out a propagation email and say, this email has passed all the tests, all the previous BBTs that the build team performed. Please go ahead and install the build and keep your eyes open and report any issues back. We measure the participation. That in the next few slides I will show how we do that. And in WAR, these numbers come up. And you can pinpoint each single person, which build you're on, what are you self-hosting? Are you, we used to use the term slacker. People don't like that. Non-achiever. Name it as you want, but we try to single out people and tell them, listen, you're on a very old build, please bring your numbers up. And most of the time we try to achieve that also by targeting the leads. And the leads then drive their own teams. And we measure the participation by lead. We show this later on in the reporting page. Constantly we send reminder email. There's an automated tool that basically checks whether you're on the right build or not, and will automatically send an email every night. It's annoying enough for people to actually participate. Sometimes people really only need a reminder to actually do it. And the voting part went away. We only measure participation. We don't ask people to physically sign off on it and say, yes, this is a good build, because it was we had a hard time telling people how long they should self-host on. Is it a day? Is it 2 days? When do you feel confident enough to say this is a good build? Also, we gave people instructions and said, you have to perform these and these tests. Start Office, start Product Studio, do all these kind of things, then the build is good and you can vote. Then people would stop caring. We don't want that. We want you to participate. You should be an active part of it. And since you're a knowledge worker, you pound on your mail machine hard enough to expose issues. So you don't need any instructions. And we skip the voting process. We measure your participation, and you have to actively measure your participation by running a tool. And here we go. The self-host tool is actually an ActiveX control. You go to the web page, it loads up, and the very first time you run it, you will see a dialog like this, which basically tells you your computer is not registered. You as a user are registered. It checks back with the database after checking what user is logged on. You have to be logged on to your mail machine, that you are actually part of the Selfos group. If you're not, you will be denied and you will be asked to sign up first, because we want to exactly know who is part of our Selfos group, because you will be held responsible for self-hosting, because you'd be called a slacker otherwise. So first time you bring it up, you will check on your machine. Is this the machine you self-host on? The first time you get this pop-up, of course. If you choose to swap around, if you choose to be one of those people who use the test machines for self-hosting, and then swap around the test machines, you will constantly get this pop-up. We measure that. We check and keep a history on how many machines you had, how often you changed it. And that will reflect really badly on you. Your lead will know about that. So the first time, you basically have to register your mail machine. This is your mail machine. You shouldn't change it. If you get a new machine, you can keep the same name. We still check the MAC address, so we will have to re-register it. But if you do this every other month, it's pretty obvious you're not getting this off the new machine. If you do this once a year, that's reasonable. Once you get past that, you should only see this once. This is the Selfos tool. It basically gets some preliminary information, your name, information about the operating system, the type of install you have, and the configuration. And basically you retrieve the information, it fills it with the information you have. Very important is the build number that we're looking for, of course, of the service pack. And once this is in, you hit register. You can add comments if necessary. If you say, well, this build is okay, but I have a concern here, no Selfos problems maybe, or if you have some specific configuration you want to let them know about, you can add comments, hit register. Thank you for voting. You're done. Your participation is recorded. And from there on, there's nothing else to do until the next propagation mail goes out and people are asking you, whoever's driving Selfhost, to participate, upgrade to the next build. Very simple. So this is what we're looking for at the war meeting. Put some color on it. That's the SP Selfhost report. It's very basic. We have 3 charts. First of all, we look at the overall participation of service pack voters. 82% in this case. It's a fairly old one. That was back when we had build 1264. It's cut off at the bottom, but don't worry about it. And basically, we have a range of builds most of the time. And we allow people to be within 3 builds. So that gives them about a week of backlog. So if you install now and don't vote for a week, we still don't start hassling you. But we still ask people to be very current. But a week is a fair. We have 2 separate groups of voters there. That's regular voters and the IDW voters. I was only talking about regular voters so far. IDW voters are obviously the people who vote on IDW builds. An IDW build is a build that meets a certain quality criteria. And for instance, the beta build, the RC build, and obviously the RTM build are IDW builds. And in between we have also separate IDW milestones. We need to reach those milestones to know that we are far along in that we are far enough along and well in time for our project. We have to meet this kind of milestones in between the milestones to know that we have the quality that we are trying to achieve. And we try to keep them on those IDW builds kind of as long-haul voters, because between IDW builds there might be between 2 weeks and 6 weeks before the next IDW build comes out. So they will not reboot for about up to 6 weeks, while as a Selfhost voter, a regular Selfhost voter, you reboot at least once a week when you upgrade to the next build. So we get some kind of long-haul coverage, might be more exposed to things like resource problems, performance issues. So there's a very small subset of people that we're asking to be on those builds, and you see 100%, there aren't many we have to chase down. The current SP voter distribution is just to know, since I said you can be within 3 builds, so you see the 3 columns on the left are good voters. There's a very small percentage of voters that are on older builds. So we still want to know, is everybody on the latest build? There's a very high percentage on the latest build. That's good. It could also be that the column on the farther to the right is higher, and still the percentage would be the same. would be more of a concern for us. Just breaks it a little bit better down for us when we look at the report. And then, of course, as I mentioned on the right side, the lead summary shows you percentages. The guys in red are in trouble. So those leads are being asked to encourage their team to upgrade. And there are links, and they can go down in this report and look at the specifically each single person, how they are doing. So leads have full information about how the team is doing, and they are being responsible to report back and forth that they're doing, they're encouraging properly their team to self-host. This is what I have for SP self-host. Now, what's more critical, one of the highest profile deliverables we have is GDRs. And we introduced GDR self-hosting about a year ago, and it's been constantly changing. We used, up until recently, a similar tool to the one you have seen just now. Actually the same tool, but it was just branching off depending what water tab you were, for GDR self-host, where you physically had to go out there and vote on each single GDR, not only the participation was measured. Now, just right now, we're changing that whole process because we are widening the whole base of self-host voters. We go out to the entire WinSE team, and only like 60 to 70 people we had so far. Everybody will solely do GDR self-host, and after we complete our preliminary self-host internally in WinSE to about 250, 260 people, this will go out to a wider range of people, which is about 1,500 people in the Windows division. So we get huge coverage there. And we need something that's much less impact, where we get the participation measure what's going on without asking people to go out there, click on the buttons too much, because people forget. It's nothing that, it should be part of your daily work, but for most people it's not really part of their daily work. They'll have to be reminded, go out and please self-host. So what we do is we use one of our internal tools, but it's not an internal tool, it's externally available, free for download. It's a patch management system, SUS, software update service, and that's pretty similar to Windows Update. Basically, when you get automatic updates offered from Windows Update, you get this pop-up, new updates are available. They're downloaded already, you just click on it and install all of them. We use this mechanism internally like corporations would use it too. So for GDRs, first of all, the GDR package has been built, and as soon as it's been built, the build BVTs have passed, and it has to be approved and added to the test pass. We need some sign-off from the test owner that in-depth testing has passed, so that the package is good, it fixes the original problem. And then we wanted to start self-hosting. But there's a pretty lengthy process involved with that to get it actually out to self-host. Because we're pushing it out through this software update service, we have to build an AU package internally first, add certain detection logic to make sure it only applies to machines that are the right platform, the right SP level, and it's not going to get re-offered after it's been installed. So this has to be tested, this detection logic, that applies properly, that it installs properly, and it's being downloaded properly, and then we can deploy it. We haven't started this yet, but the next step would be the deployment itself. We sync it on the server, on our SAS server, which pushes out those packages, and those will be fully managed. Fully managed means at a specific point in time during the night, I think 3 a.m. is what we picked right now, those packages will be downloaded automatically to your system. Once they're downloaded, they're going to be installed automatically. Then there's the option of rebooting your machine automatically or leaving it up to you. So having a pop-up come up and asking you to reboot the system. Click OK, basically. Right now we don't enforce the reboot because many people have tons of applications open. We don't want to have them lose all the data of unsafe documents that they have. Shouldn't have that when you go home, unsafe documents, but it happens. So we basically provide them right now with a non-forced, fully managed option. In the middle of the night at 3 a.m. they get those packages installed. In the morning when they come in, they have this pop-up sitting there waiting for them and saying, are you ready to reboot now? That's when they should reboot. This happens no more often than once a week. And hopefully we have it only once. We try to accumulate all the GDR packages to one big deployment, and deploy it at a specific time, probably Monday morning, and then you don't have to do it again. So it's only one reboot for all those packages, and it's fully managed. You don't have to worry about anything else. That hasn't happened so far in this fashion. Before we had lightly managed. People were basically offered, as you usually get offered your AU packages from Windows Update. There's a dialog coming up saying, you have new updates, do you want to install them right now? And then it's your choice. You could decline them. We don't want people to decline them, because people tend to decline them. And then you have to go back and ask them not to decline it, and it causes maybe problems on the server side, and takes time. And lastly, we're looking at a report. And there's a new tool. Here we go. That's, I think, externally available too. It's called SAS reporting. It's pretty new, and it basically allows us to look at the server log, because what happens is SAS server communicates back with the client, back and forth, and tells you when it has actually been downloaded, when the package has been installed, if the install was successful, if the reboot has happened. So all this information is available on the server side. And all this tool basically does is providing a front end and lets you browse through that information. And since it's usually pretty big, so those IIS logs, because you have many thousands of machines attached to it, you have to sync it on a regular basis and have a static set of data in a SQL database. And all the way on the bottom you see TP11 packages. This was the last test pass. We had 3 GDR packages. Of course we deploy all the regular packages too. Critical updates how you have to install. The TP packages, test pass, GDR test pass packages are the only packages that you install on top of it. And once the test pass ends, we release those packages. So if you have not installed those packages, then you will get those offered as regular packages anyway. That's our deployment mechanism, and again we measure right now only the participation and the failures, because as you can see on the far right, there's a column that says errors. And you see there's 1, 2 errors in between. Those TPs have no errors, 0 errors, that's good. If you would click on those, I could bet that most of those will say the only error that you could record is the package was declined. You got it offered to install, and you said, no, I don't want it. That's counted as error. And we could also see this if you look at the report, if you look at the individual patch. So it gives us a basic summary about where we are at. This is about GDR self-host. One thing about GDR self-host I should mention is, I mentioned this before, is we have to sustain many platforms on SP levels. Right now we have 6. That's WinTK SP3, SP2 and SP4, XP RTM and SP1, and Windows 2003 RTM. Also we have to make sure that Windows 2003 SP1, XP SP2 and WinTK SP5 won't get any of those packages offered. Happens sometimes too, if there's a problem with detection logic. That's something we kind of test on the side. It's a side effect of self-host. You're kind of self-hosting the detection logic of automatic update packages. It's not the main goal, but it's something that gives us extra confidence in the test pass that the Windows Update team performs themselves, testing those packages. But if we have a deployment of 1,750 people total, that should give us a lot of confidence that those detection logic that we built there, those packages, are fine, are good to go. So the last thing, that's probably something that we're interested in, is the vendor self-host. And that's something we implemented quite some time ago. We're not making much use of it yet because we're way too focused on the GDRs, GDR self-hosting, and SP5 hasn't really kicked off yet to go very deep into it and self-hosting it and measuring those numbers and enforcing this. But the goal of Windows Self-Host is basically Windows 2000 will be completely outsourced. We still want to measure that. We still want to know what's going on, and self-hosting is something that anybody can do because everybody has a mail machine. So we want you to self-host, of course. Now, measuring that in the way we do is kind of difficult because we have a huge server backend. There's a lot of maintenance involved in this, and it goes very deep. What we really want with Service Pack Self-Host is the participation, make sure the participation is there, and we have it on a broad basis. So we developed a lightweight solution, which doesn't require things like ActiveX, ugly stuff, it's old, we don't want to use it anymore anyway. It's totally detached from any web pages. It's a decentralized data collection. What we have is actually an Access MDB file, which is portable. You just put it in a certain location, you modify the INI file it ships with, and it will just log all the information in this MDB file. And that MDB file you can send off back to us, and we can then sync it with our SQL server and display it in any fashion we want to. We have the data available. So you know what it looks like. Of course, since Self-Host is an internal process for us, we need an end-user license agreement that we have to ship with it, because we share with you our internal processes here. So that will come up only once. We made it easy enough, so it will come up once. Once you agree to it, it will log this in the MDB database, in the Access database, and you won't have to see it ever again. You can even read it if you want to. You have to read it, of course, but officially you have to read it. And that's all it does here. It's limited. If you compare it to the regular Self-Host, you don't see anything about the install method. It collects a little bit more data right now. We also collect information about what the Windows Media Player version you have installed, what Outlook Express version you have installed. But what we basically care about is who you are, what kind of build you have installed, if you have TS enabled, IS enabled, what the basic configuration of your system is. And all you have to click is register. Once it comes up, it already retrieved your information. You don't have to go through several dialogues. Once you hit register, it's a one mouse click solution, you're done. Before we go into question and answers, key takeaways from today. Self-Host. It's a key indicator of the overall quality of the deliverables we ship. We know how many people have it installed actively. You can approximate how many hours this is, how many days have been self-hosted, how many man-hours have gone into this whole thing. That gives us a measurement of runtime that we have, and that gives us some confidence in the overall quality. Because you're heavily using those machines, you are exposed to the GDRs or the service pack you have installed. So it definitely tells us if there's no bug found in there when a couple of thousand people have it installed, that's pretty good. Doesn't of course, there's nothing guaranteed, but it gives us some reassurance that we have a high quality build, high quality product that we can ship out. Also, self-host is your responsibility. As I told you, self-hosting is only providing the environment. You install whatever deliverable you're being told to, and then what happens in between is totally up to you. If you see some problem, if you get an AV, some application, and you deem to ignore it, there's nothing that we can measure there. If you say, okay, memory corruption because the application doesn't work the way it should work, might not be a problem with our deliverable, might not be a self-host problem, but you should report it. It's your responsibility to keep your eyes open. You have to identify if there's a problem with your system. If you see different behavior and you're the only one who knows the behavior of your system, you should. I have some pop-up here that basically blocks everything, I'm sorry. You basically have to know how it behaves. If something behaves differently, report it. Escalate as quickly as possible, file a bug. We can always resolve it as one fix or by design. Lastly, self-host is not stress. That's one of the biggest problems we have seen, and I gave you the comparison between stress and self-host. Self-host is not stress. Don't use your stress machine to self-host on, or tell people that you would self-host on this particular machine, because you're not. You take away a huge portion of our coverage if you do that. Questions? Don't tell me I answered all the questions in the last question session. I would be surprised. Any questions about the walkthroughs, at least? Please?
What is the process for raising self-host bugs? Is everybody authorized to raise bug or
Like the very last thing I just said, if you really find a problem, file a bug. The question, I forgot to repeat the question. The question is, how do you raise a self-host bug? Can everybody raise a self-host bug? Yes, everybody who self-hosts, and there's almost no restriction of who is allowed to self-host. Everybody can self-host. We encourage anybody to self-host. If you find a problem, file a bug. We provide sometimes a template of what you should put in the bug, but as a test engineer you should know what a good bug report looks like. Put repro steps in there, tell them what configuration you have, tell them what you did before the problem happened, if there's anything that any kind of actions you performed, if you're very low in memory all of a sudden, and that caused the problem. Be as detailed as possible. How to file the bug, that you should know. I can't give you any instructions there because it depends on the problem, and anybody can file it. There's no specific authorization necessary. Any further questions? Oh, yep.
How do you go about debugging a self-hosted?
The question is
How do you go about debugging?
how to go about debugging your own self-host bug. If it happens to be in your area, the problem, go ahead and try to debug it. Try to triage it. I mean, of course, as a test engineer, that's your main objective. You have to find a problem, find out where the problem is coming from. Depends on the level of competence you have and expertise in that particular area. If it's a very obvious thing, you might be able to even find the problem, the cause of it, and even rule out that there's a problem with the service pack. But it's not guaranteed. It's also completely up to you. But key is report the issue. Once you find the issue and you feel confident that this is an issue we have to look into and not maybe some fluke you can rule out by yourself, then you should definitely report it. If you think, oh, this is maybe something that I did wrong, then feel free to resolve it yourself.
Yeah, when a self-host bug is found and concerned dev lead fix the bug, like again self-host testing is repeated, or just the test owner will just check the bug and check it?
So the question is, if a self-host bug is found, you're talking about the test pass? If it is basically a new test injected in the test pass, is that what you're referring to?
Self-host bug is found,
Mm-hmm.
that bug is fixed
Mm-hmm.
by the concerned developer. And after that, again, self-host testing is done, or just a particular component only
Okay.
check it out.
Yeah. I think I answered the question right. The question is, if a self-host bug is found and the bug is fixed, will we continue self-hosting, or will we add the new test to the appropriate test pass?
So you repeat the self-host testing again after fixing the bug, or?
Well, self-host testing, that's the thing. What is self-host testing really? Is self-host testing repeated? Well, there's no such thing really as self-host testing. Self-host testing happens just by doing your daily work. Of course, one of the things that will probably part of the fixing the bug is you have the repro steps, and the tester who works on that particular issue will verify the fix by going through those steps. And if you have a problem in Office by opening a clipboard library and it breaks, then this would be one of the steps you would perform to make sure that the bug is fixed. But it's nothing that is part of self-host testing itself. Self-host testing will not be used to confirm fixes. It's about exposing problems, new problems. So definitely the test code will be fixed and will be part of the actual test pass of the component, but not part of a self-host test pass, because there is no such thing as a self-host test pass. Okay. Another question.
Is the build of are the builds different from your regular builds? Do they have debugging information that developer debug the problem?
Are the builds different that we self-host? Do they contain debugging information? Yes. I mean, you talk about the builds that we have internally versus the release builds, correct? Yes, the release builds definitely don't have our private symbols. We call it private symbols. And those are the symbols you need on your debugger to give the developer, or if you try to resolve the problem yourself, more detailed information to basically identify the problem in the source code. So you have private symbols. We have those for internal builds. We have those also for the release build, but only internally available. The release build won't have the symbols we have internally available. They only have the public symbols.
Related question is, will that create a situation scenario where the problem could be different from a real life scenario, because the real life scenario build might not have those debugging symbols?
Well, the question is, could this cause a problem that we don't see in a real life environment because we have private symbols versus public symbols in a release build? Well, actually the symbols don't impact you directly. The symbols are loaded on the debugger. So you can run the machine without a debugger attached. Most of the time this is the case. Only if you hit a break or if you try to look at the stack, then you need those symbols. So those symbols don't impact you. The answer is technically no. Private symbols, public symbols don't influence you at all in self-hosting. Another question here.
Does a self-host test cover all the components? Because suppose it is going to be an operating machine, it will be activation related. But if it is going to be something which is integrated to an operating system functionality, does a self-host even cover that, or if it is, then how do you explain that?
Again, the question, does self-host cover all the components? The thing is, self-host cannot cover everything. Self-host is not a test bus. Self-host is not well defined. We don't know exactly what we will find and what we will exactly cover. We try to capture machine information, hardware information, but that only gives us information what hardware we have covered. It doesn't mean that we get all the permutations that are possible, which application on which hardware we are running, on which configuration. So we get as much coverage as possible this way on self-hosting, but there's a lot of coverage we don't get. We might not touch certain components. We don't expose all the issues that are out there.
One related question is, do you self-host on your DHCP servers or RAS servers which are critical for your operation in the
This is what we mostly refer to dog fooding. Repeat the question is, do we self-host on servers, DHCP servers, RAS servers? No. Unless you have RAS server, DHCP server as your main machine. And you won't. You have client machines, because you work with those in a client functionality. Even though you might have Windows 2000 server installed, the server SKU, you will not configure a RAS server on your mail machine. But what happens is we have a server deployment. So the service pack will be deployed, specifically IDW builds and major milestones across the organization to those people who actually maintain the servers. But that's separate from the self-host we track. But that happens also. So there is coverage that's happening, but that's not particularly what we are targeting in self-host. If we expose issues in some way, that's fine, but it's not necessarily the case. Okay, there are no further questions? Then I close it for today. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for magnitude of these questions. I think you resolved many issues that other people's questions were too. And at the end, I only have a few links. That's our web page. We have SP Self-Host. SAS activity is basically the report you have seen for GDR Self-Host. That's the SAS reporting. If you want to know more about the SAS deployment, software update service, it's the external website. And the core team's website is at WinWeb Self-Host. That's how they self-host current products, like Longhorn. Those people have daily builds. It's slightly different. Thank you very much.